In this life, the one thing you are never supposed to doubt is your own blood. You watch your friends. You count the seconds before a partner lies to you. But blood does not turn. A man will put a loaded gun into the hand of his own cousin before he hands it to a stranger, because the stranger might be wearing a wire, and the cousin never would. That is the story these 6 men told themselves. The record tells a colder one. Across 4 families and roughly 30 years, the person who ended each of their lives was not the government, not a rival, not a stranger at all. It was a cousin, then a son, then a brother-in-law, then, at the very end, a nephew. The people these men would have died for were the people who buried them. So how does a man survive the FBI, survive the other families, survive decades on the street with a target on his back, and still get destroyed by the one person he never once thought to fear? Keep one image in your mind while we count them. One of these men built an empire out of concrete. His company mixed it and poured it, and the casinos of Atlantic City rose on those foundations floor by floor. That concrete is still down there tonight, holding up a skyline. His family is scattered. His empire is a stack of court files. His own nephew saw to that, and we will get to him last. 6 men, 6 betrayals. Every single one came from inside the family. Let's count them. Nobody paid much attention to a Bonanno soldier named Anthony Mirra in the early 1970s. He was a knife man, an enforcer, a body in the room when a body was needed. That was about to change, and it would change because of a favor. You already know the shape of what he did, because Hollywood turned it into a movie. In the middle of that decade, Mirra vouched for a jewel thief, calling himself Donnie Brasco, and walked him straight into the Bonanno family. Donnie Brasco was an FBI agent named Joseph Pistone, and when the Bureau finally pulled him out in 1981, the family understood it had been opened up from the inside by a man Mirra had personally sponsored. The received version stops there. Mirra brought in the rat, so Mirra had to die. The part that got buried is how they did it, and who they used to do it. Anthony Mirra was a paranoid man, and paranoia had kept him alive a long time. He trusted almost no one. The one category of person he still let close was blood. So when the order came down from the boss, Joseph Massino, the contract did not go to a team of strangers. It went to Mirra's own family. The men assigned to kill him had grown up with him, some of them in the same tenement in Knickerbocker Village on the Lower East Side. His cousin, Joseph D'Amico. Another cousin, Richard Cantarella. An uncle, Alfred Embarato, the one everyone called Al Walker. These were not associates. These were the people who had sat at his family's table. The plan used all 3. The cousins got him relaxed and got him where they needed him. The uncle was part of the machinery around it, and D'Amico, the blood he trusted most, did the actual killing. It was a family operation in the ugliest sense of the word. On February 18, 1982, Anthony Mirra walked into a parking garage in Lower Manhattan with his cousin D'Amico beside him, which is exactly why his guard was down. Blood does not turn. Mirra put his key into the security box to open the gate. He never got to turn it. D'Amico described it later under oath, testifying at Massino's federal trial in 2004. He said he shot his cousin at close range, several times, in the side of the head. Mirra was 54 years old. He died in a car with a man he trusted because they shared a grandmother. There is a wrinkle here worth stating plainly, because this audience will know it. Years later, after Massino himself became a cooperator, he testified that the family's real fear had not only been the Brasco humiliation. He claimed they had also come to suspect Mirra was himself an informant, feeding information to federal drug agents. That version has never been fully corroborated, and it comes from a man with every reason to reshape the record. So take it for what it is. A second possible motive, sworn to by an interested party. D'Amico did not stay loyal to the men who made him a killer either. Around 2003, he flipped, and he sat in a witness chair and gave up the family, including the cousin he had murdered on their orders. In 2016, at the San Gennaro Festival in Little Italy, a Bonanno associate recognized D'Amico in the crowd and screamed the word "rat" at him in the street. The man who had once been trusted because he was blood ended up the most exposed kind of outsider there is. Anthony Mirra trusted blood too far, and blood put a bullet in his skull. The next man on this list trusted blood he had raised from birth, and that blood was wearing a wire. For more than half a century, John Franzese was the kind of name younger wise guys said with their voice lowered. Everyone called him Sonny. He was born in Naples in 1917. He rose to underboss of the Colombo family, and in his prime he ran a piece of New York nightlife that put him in rooms with Frank Sinatra at the Copacabana. More than that, he was old school, in the exact way this world claims to respect. He went to prison for a long stretch, and he did not talk. He did not give them one name. Consider what that reputation actually meant. Franzese had done long federal time, years of it, in an era when informing was still rare and lethal, and he had come home without handing the government a single man. In a world full of talkers, he was the genuine article, the stand-up guy the younger men held up as the standard. He was living proof, the story went, that some men simply could not be broken. Then the government found the one thing that could break him. Not a threat, not a cell. His son. John Franzese Jr. was one of Sonny's boys, and his life had gone somewhere his father's code had no answer for. He became a drug addict, and somewhere down in that wreckage, the FBI reached him. Beginning around 2005, John Jr. started wearing a recording device into meetings with his own father, capturing the old man's voice on tape, hour after hour. He later admitted, on the record, that the Bureau paid him about $50,000 for his cooperation. That is what the loyalty of a lifetime turned out to cost. Not a fortune, the price of a mid-sized car paid to a sick man to testify against the father who raised him. In 2010, the case went to trial in Brooklyn. The charges were almost small next to the legend, racketeering built on the shakedown of 2 Manhattan strip clubs and a Long Island pizzeria. What made the room go quiet was the witness. John Franzese Jr. took the stand against his father, and his father sat at the defense table and listened. Sonny Franzese was 93 years old by then. At moments during the testimony, the old man's chin dropped to his chest and he dozed off, right there in the courtroom, while his son buried him. The press started calling him the Nod Father. He was convicted and sentenced to 8 years, which for a man in his 90s is a sentence with only one way out. Depending on where you sit, what John Jr. did was either the one honest act of a broken life or the lowest thing a son can do to a father. The comment section on a story like this never agrees, and it is not supposed to. One thing has to be said clearly, because it gets confused constantly. This was not Michael Franzese, Sonny's other son, the former Colombo captain who walked away from the life and now talks about it publicly. Michael did not wire his father. The son with the microphone was John Jr., the one the life had already chewed up. Sonny Franzese outlived the sentence, and nearly outlived everyone. He died in February of 2020, at the age of 103, one of the last living links to a New York that no longer exists. The man who could not be broken by prison was broken by his own child, and he spent his final free years knowing exactly which of his sons had done it. Which raises the question every man in this life is quietly terrified of. If the people closest to you are the only ones who can end you, what do you do the day you hear your own name in a whisper? Put yourself at that table for a second. The man across from you has killed people over less than an insult, and tonight the word going around is that you might be next. You have 2 moves. You can stay loyal and pray the whisper is wrong, and hope nobody who loves you ever gets reached the way John Jr. got reached. Or you can pick up a phone, cut a deal, and wear the word rat for the rest of your life. Which one are you? Tell me in the comments, because there is no clean answer, and I want to hear yours. I pull these stories from trial transcripts and federal files every week, so subscribe if you don't want to miss the next one. So the code was already cracked, but the next man did not just get broken by family. He turned betrayal into an art form, and by the time he was done, he had out-informed every rat he ever hunted. Joseph Massino was the last of a certain kind of boss. They called him the Last Don, because by the time he ran the Bonanno family through the 1990s and into the 2000s, every other New York boss was either dead, in prison, or exposed on tape, and Massino was still standing. He ran the Borgata out of a restaurant in Maspeth, Queens. kept his circle small, and banned his own men from saying his name out loud, telling them to point to their ear instead. He beat case after case. For years, it looked like he was the one man the government could not lay a finger on. The man he trusted most in the world was Salvatore Vitali. Everyone called him Good-Looking Sal. He was Massino's underboss, his oldest friend, and something more permanent than either. Back in 1960, Massino had married a young woman named Josephine Vitali. Salvatore was her brother. The boss and the underboss were brothers-in-law. They had built the whole thing together, from stealing trucks as kids to running one of the 5 families. Then Vitali was arrested in January of 2003, and the arithmetic of a life sentence went to work on him. He decided to cooperate. And because he was the underboss, because he had been in the room for everything, the man who came apart on the witness stand was not a low-level associate guessing at the truth. It was the boss's own brother-in-law, laying the entire family open, murder by murder. That was the story the public knew about Joseph Massino, the untouchable last Don. The grand jury heard a very different one, narrated by the man who had married into his family. And then a second cooperator came forward, and another, until the trial in 2004 became a parade of made men who had all once sworn they would die first. Massino was convicted on all 11 counts. He pleaded guilty to a role in 8 murders. One of them was the killing of Dominic Napolitano, the man the movies call Sonny Black, whose hands were cut off after death, as a message about who you shake hands with. When the verdict came in, Massino's daughter Adeline was heard to whisper, "Oh God," from the gallery. He was looking at life, and on one count, at the federal death penalty. And here is where Joseph Massino did the thing no sitting boss of a New York family had ever done. No sitting boss ever flipped. Bosses were the men other men informed on. They did not inform. But facing that death penalty, the last Don became a cooperator for the same government that had just convicted him. He wore a wire in a prison visiting room against his own successor, Vincent Basciano, recorded him, and that recording helped convict Basciano at trial in 2011. Think about what that means in plain terms. The boss who banned his men from saying his name out loud became a government witness. The most careful gangster of his generation ended up doing exactly what his brother-in-law had done to him, only bigger. When Massino was finally resentenced, the federal judge on the case, Nicodemo Scarfo, said out loud that Massino might be the single most important cooperator in the modern history of law enforcement against the American mafia. He had been betrayed by blood. Then he betrayed everyone. At least Joseph Massino was a victim first. The next man on this list was never anybody's victim. When the blood on this list got spilled, he was the one holding the knife. Everything about this list flips now, because Salvatore Gravano is the exception that proves how the machine really worked. You know him as Sammy the Bull. You know he flipped on John Gotti in 1991, admitted to 19 murders, and walked out of prison after roughly 5 years. That is the famous betrayal, and it is real, but it was not his first. Long before Gotti, according to Gravano's own detailed account in the book Underboss, written with the journalist Peter Moss, and consistent with what he later described under oath, Sammy Gravano helped kill his own brother-in-law. His name was Nicholas Cibetta. Everyone called him Nicky. He was the younger brother of Gravano's wife, Deborah. He was a Gambino associate, in his early 20s, and by Gravano's telling he had become a problem, using cocaine, getting into public fights, embarrassing people who could not be embarrassed. By Gravano's account, the order to kill Cibetta came down from the top of the family, from the boss, Paul Castellano, relayed through the captain, Frank DeCicco. Gravano says his first reaction was fury. This was his wife's brother. This was family, in the most literal sense there is. And then he made the choice this whole life demands, sooner or later, from everyone in it. He said he had taken an oath, and that Cosa Nostra came before everything, before Deborah, before her brother, before blood. In 1978, Nicky Cibetta was killed. By Gravano's own account, the men who carried out the actual killing were members of his crew, not Gravano himself. The body was never recovered. All that was ever found was a piece of him, a hand. The family held a kind of funeral for it. and Gravano went home. By his own telling, he lived inside that marriage for years afterward, with the knowledge of what had happened to Nicky sitting between him and his wife, a thing he had agreed to and could never take back. She had lost a brother to a world her husband served. That is the arithmetic of this life, stated as plainly as it can be stated. The oath is on one side of the ledger. Everyone you love is on the other. He told himself he could carry that and stay whole. He told himself it proved his loyalty, that he had passed the hardest test the life could set. He shouldn't have. Because every other man on this list was betrayed by his own blood. Sammy Gravano was the betrayal. He is the living proof that the thing these men called a family was always a business first, and that when the business asked, the family got fed to it. He said it about Gotti years later. He had already lived it with Nicky Sabetta. The oath beat the blood every single time. Gravano chose the business over his own family and lived. The next man had it done to him the other way around. His family chose the business, and they chose it over him, over a rumor that started in his own bed. The next man ran a whole crime family, at least for a little while. His name was John D'Amato, and they called him Johnny Boy. In the early 1990s, he was the acting boss of the DeCavalcante family of New Jersey, the outfit that decades later would become famous as the real-life inspiration for The Sopranos. The DeCavalcantes were the punchline of the New York families. The Jersey cousins the bigger outfits looked down on. And that is exactly why the position mattered so much to the men inside it. Running that family was the whole of their world, even if it was a small world. D'Amato got the top job with John Gotti's backing while the official boss sat in prison. For a moment, Johnny D'Amato sat at the very top of his. Then it ended over a rumor, and the rumor came from the person closest to him. According to testimony given years later by a DeCavalcante hitman named Anthony Capo, D'Amato's own girlfriend told a member of the family that D'Amato had been visiting sex clubs in Manhattan, and that his conduct there had included other men. Whether that was true or not almost did not matter. Once the story was inside the family, the men in it decided a boss like that could not be allowed to lead them, or to live. Capo testified to the reasoning in a Brooklyn courtroom in 2003. He said, in substance, that nobody was going to respect them if they had a boss like that sitting down to discuss Cosa Nostra business. I want to be precise here, because it matters. The claim about D'Amato's private life lives in the record as testimony, as a stated motive for a murder. It is not something to state as settled fact about the man himself. What is fact is that his own people believed it and killed him for it. On January 6, 1992, D'Amato was picked up in a white Lincoln near his girlfriend's home in Brooklyn. Inside the car, Anthony Capo shot him. His body was never found. By the accounts that later surfaced, he was disposed of so completely that not a trace of him was ever recovered. All that turned up was the car, with his blood in it. The acting boss of an entire family simply vanished off the earth, erased by the men he had been running the week before. There are researchers of this era who suspect the rumor was convenient, that D'Amato had made enemies inside his own family for other reasons, and that the story about his private life was a clean way to justify a killing they already wanted. Either way, the mechanism is the same. The threat did not come from a rival family or a federal wire. It came from his girlfriend's mouth and his own crew's hands. Everyone on this list so far was destroyed by blood or by marriage. Johnny D'Amato was destroyed by the next ring out, the family he served, and the woman he slept beside. In this world, that is close enough to count. The people who are supposed to be yours are the ones with the clearest shot. D'Amato was undone by a whisper from someone in his bed. The last man was undone by the closest blood he had, the boy he had raised like a son. And the empire that boy helped him build is still standing tonight, under a city, in the ground. And now the nephew. The man who built the empire out of concrete was Nicodemo Scarfo, known up and down the East Coast as Little Nicky. He took over the Philadelphia family in 1981, and he ran it through the 1980s in what even law enforcement called the bloodiest stretch in that family's entire history. He was small, he was vain, and he killed people over perceived disrespect, the way other men send back a bad drink. When New Jersey legalized casino gambling in Atlantic City in 1978, Scarfo saw the future being poured out of the back of cement trucks. He set up a concrete contracting company called Scarf Incorporated, and he installed his young nephew as its president. As the casinos climbed up along the boardwalk, Scarf Incorporated got the work. It did jobs on at least 6 casino and hotel projects in those early years, and investigators later said Scarfo's company laid the foundations for many of the resorts that rose in that boom. He set up a second company alongside it that supplied and placed the steel rods that reinforced poured concrete, so the family had a hand in both the pour and the bones inside it. He got that business the way he got everything, by making sure the alternative to hiring his company was worse than the bill. In 1982, hauled before the New Jersey Casino Control Commission to answer for his influence over the Atlantic City Hotel Workers Union, Scarfo took the Fifth Amendment roughly 30 times in a single appearance and walked back out the door. The nephew he made president of that company was Philip Leonetti. His mother was Scarfo's sister. Leonetti had been a local kid, an athlete, a boy who idolized the uncle who took him everywhere. Scarfo had no son old enough to stand beside him in the life, so he raised Leonetti into it himself. He brought him into the family with the blood oath, the ceremony these men treat as more binding than birth, and then he made him underboss, one of the youngest in the entire modern history of the American Mafia. There was no one on earth closer to Nicky Scarfo. Leonetti was his blood, his heir, and his second in command, all in one person. Then the cases landed. In 1988, a federal racketeering conviction put Leonetti away with a 45-year sentence. And 45 years is the kind of number that ends a man's calculations about loyalty. In 1989, Philip Leonetti flipped. The underboss, the nephew, the heir, sat down with the government and then climbed into the witness box. He admitted his own role in 10 murders, and he testified against his uncle and against dozens of other Philadelphia mob figures, marching a generation of that family into prison in his uncle's own footsteps. The boy Scarfo had raised to inherit the empire was the boy who took it apart. Nicodemo Scarfo was convicted of racketeering and of first-degree murder and sentenced, among other terms, to 55 years. He never breathed free air again. He died on January 13, 2017, in the Federal Medical Center at Butner, North Carolina, an old man in prison clothes, 87 years old, a number on a wall. The nephew he had loved and made and trusted with everything was the reason. Line all 6 of them up, and the pattern is impossible to miss. It was never the FBI that got closest to these men. It was the people who passed them the bread at the dinner table. It was a cousin who shared a grandmother, a son with a microphone under his shirt, a brother-in-law who had stood up at the wedding, a wife's brother fed to the oath, a girlfriend's rumor, and a nephew raised to be a king. The machine these men served understood something they refused to believe about themselves. Its most efficient weapon was never a stranger with a gun. It was familiarity. It almost never sent someone you didn't know, because the person you love is the only one who can get close enough to finish it cleanly. They all swore the same oath, and the oath said, blood could not be turned. The record says blood was the murder weapon, 6 times over. The life always called itself a family. That was the con hiding underneath every other con these men ran, because a family is supposed to be the one thing a wire and a plea deal can never reach, and every man on this list learned in his last hour that it reaches everything. Nicky Scarfo poured his empire into the ground under Atlantic City. His company mixed the concrete, and the casinos climbed up out of it floor by floor, and that concrete is still down there tonight, holding up a skyline that never learned his name. The family that fed on it is scattered to court files and old age. The nephew he raised put him in a cell in North Carolina, where he died as a number. The concrete outlasted the family. It outlasted the empire. It outlasted the king. Point 2.